Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Jessica McCall, and I have at least one of my GTAs here, Erin Cassidy, and I think that one of the other GTAs will be joining us. I am going to go ahead and pull up our screen just to kind of give you an idea of what's going to be happening. So you should see here our topic for today, and I am actually the supervisor of the basic course director. And one thing that's really been challenging for me this semester is just the role of being a supervisor and what that means at this point. And so I thought it would be really great to just talk about being supervised and supervising in the age of COVID, because I know it's been different for me. It's been different for my GTAs and my instructors. And so I thought it would be really great for us to kind of just, walk through some of the challenges, but then also really focus on the opportunities and sort of some of the things that we found that have been maybe inspirational, maybe have been new pieces of information for us that we can use in the future. So what I'd love to do before we get started is invite you to go into the chat for just a second and go ahead and write down just one word that comes to mind when you think of either supervising or being supervised during the age of COVID. So just one word. Great. So Kellyanne's got mentor, uncertainty was mine, expansive, difficult, problem solver, psychologist, emails, good, Arian. So patience, yeah. Expansive, support. Great. Awesome. So I know this can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so we want to welcome all those voices. I certainly don't want to be the only one talking today. I want to get everybody sort of jumping in. I'm going to go right back over to our screen for a second and show you sort of what we, many of you may have been dealing with before this semester or before last semester. We are very active in terms of our training, our engagement. So this is 2 years ago. Many of the TAs were outside talking, doing small group activities. This was very common for us, not just at the beginning of the semester, but then as we progressed through the semester. And then this is sort of what it looks like now, right? We were able to preserve some of the interaction, not a whole lot. Our university was pretty strict on meetings. They didn't want anybody meeting outside of classes unless it was absolutely required. We had some face-to-face training in the beginning of the semester, but a lot of it was actually online. And then we have a very small office space. When the people started doing the rounds at the university, looking at the different spaces and looking at social distancing, they quickly said no more than 3 or 4 people in there at a time. And we typically have about 12 GTAs who are usually piling all in there and talking about everything and mentoring one another, right? So we knew this was kind of going to be a little bit of a change for us. Just put those pictures up there to kind of get you thinking about what changes you have seen and maybe what opportunities that has brought. Okay, so these are some of the questions that I thought might be really good for us to explore today. So first of all, what has been most challenging for you personally and professionally, whether you are supervising or being supervised, right? So really try to focus on that mentor or mentee, which I know is not technically a word, but that relationship, right? Or being led or following, but then also what opportunities have presented themselves that may not exist during a typical semester. And then what I'd love to do as we move forward is to think most about the solutions, right? And just how this has impacted us overall and how it might impact our leadership and supervision in the future. What I would invite us to do is first talk a little bit in small groups. We'll probably just divide into 2 groups because there aren't that many of us. And I definitely want to have a chance for everybody to hear the different ideas. But I'd love for you to kind of talk in small groups first. I had sent out in the chat a Google Doc. And so I think everybody should be able to access that. And I'd love for you to just kind of work through some of those questions and then just start jotting down some ideas. So what are some of the possible solutions and opportunities that you'd love to share with people? And then maybe how might it shape your experiences in the future? So I know one thing for me, just as an example, is I ended up having a lot more responsibility for the actual day-to-day courses this time around because so much of it was online. So while we had a standardized curriculum, standardized assignments, our GTAs had a lot of autonomy in the classrooms, and they can kind of pick and choose the activities that they wanted to do. But because a lot of it was online, it ended up that I was sort of creating a lot of the content and shipping it out. And so while that does present some opportunities for the future because we now have this content ready to go, it also gives me caution because I don't want to take over, right? And I don't want to say, here's what you need to do, because I still want them to have some agency. So those are just kind of things that I'm thinking about for the future, okay? All right, are there questions about our plan? We feel okay? All right, one thing I do, if you, and I want to leave it open at this point. If you just want to talk generally, that's totally fine. I know we all sort of need a little something different. If you need a framework for talking through this, you could think about it in terms of sort of logistical problems, relational problems or concerns, and then ethical, because I know those are three things I've been thinking about. So if you want sort of a framework to think through some of the things that are happening, please feel free to use that. If you'd rather just talk openly, go for it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the screen now, and you'll see over, and I will put it in there again, the Google Doc, and it has our questions on there, and I'd love for you to kind of record some things. And Jess is here. I wanted to introduce her as well. And she's another one of the GTAs who will be jumping into the rooms. So I'm going to go ahead and split us up just into two rooms so we have a chance to talk a little bit more. And we will, let's see, dun, 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 go from there. All righty. And then I will go ahead and put people in their rooms. And we will come back in probably about, let's take about 15 minutes, okay, to kind of work with some of these ideas. Okay, here we go. Hi.
Hi.
So did we have any initial thoughts about just opportunities that have come to you during this time of supervision or being supervised?
More challenges than opportunities.
More challenges.
Let's be honest.
No, I love that, Kelly. I kept thinking, I kept pushing myself. I'm like, we'd love to get beyond the challenges. But I think you're right. A lot of what I've seen too have been challenges. So just trying to figure out can we reframe those in some way? So what are some of the challenges? Do we want to work through the logistical, relational, and ethical, or do you just want to go for it?
The one that I have that I'm going to start with actually has nothing to do, I don't think, with any of those three. It's a perceptual one. I had no idea. My graduate student did not want to be on campus, and so we were encouraged to do face-to-face teaching. So I was the one who was on campus all the time. He was the one who was on Zoom all the time. And they perceived this like rude, hateful relationship between the two of us that I never would have anticipated. Because anytime something went wrong, we would always text each other because we couldn't use Zoom to communicate that. But somewhere along the way, they had this amazing perception that I didn't like him and that I was very rude to him associated with it. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to change it. It was just, I guess, in part the logistics of him not wanting to be on campus and me always being the one on campus.
That's really interesting. And so is this a perception that the graduate student held, or was it just the students themselves?
Just the undergraduate students themselves.
Interesting. Did anybody else have perception issues like that? Well, so one that I was very worried about, and it kind of ties into perception and also relationship for me, and a little bit into ethical, because I certainly don't think we can disconnect these, but I was very concerned about the perceptions my TAs would have of me, because they are all teaching in the classroom. And that was partially their choice, partially the university's choice, in the sense that they wanted the basic courses in the classroom. And my classes that I was teaching were upper level courses. And I also had 2 younger kids at home. My husband's in healthcare. And so I very quickly realized that I was going to have to teach from home, right? And they were going to have to go in, and that felt very awkward to me. And so I never wanted them to feel like, why do we have to be the ones, in the trenches facing all of this, and she gets to be the one sitting at home. So I was pretty strategic about making sure that I was in my office when they, for a physical interaction, when they got out of classes, or, anytime that I could, I would go and just show up in their office to say hi, kind of thing. But that was a concern I had. Funny enough, Erin, I was talking to her earlier, I mentioned that to her, and she said, we never even thought about that. So for me, I guess I'm thinking, thank goodness, something worked there, but that was a major concern of mine, like along those lines of perception, like this is not a good relationship because you're not treating each other, you're not equal, you're not treating each other ethically.
I think that bleeds over into another issue that you mentioned, Jessica, earlier, that you are dealing with, and that is the fact that my graduate students went from being fairly autonomous, having a lot of latitude in the classroom, to basically just grading, because that's effectively what they did with an online course that has been completely designed outside of their input. And we had to do that because the course had to be delivered by August 15th when the university started.
Sure.
And they weren't on contract, right? So this is actually, the work that needed to be done to develop that online course had to be done, and they couldn't technically be part of that. And yet it's created this dynamic, which, I regret, because I feel like they have no latitude at this point to design their courses and teach the way they wanted to. And many of them, I found, tried to continue in that vein, tried to think that they could just, I'm just going to go on Zoom and do my class the way I always did it. And when, because it's online, you can't do it that way.
Right.
And plus our students had challenges that they probably truly didn't appreciate. There's a lot of presumptions built into young instructors.
Sure.
That you learn over time just aren't true. Mm-hmm. And so many of those came to the forefront, things like assuming our students had internet access, or assuming that they had the same amount of time to devote to their course during the class periods, when many of them are working to support their family at this point.
Right.
So I found that to be really a challenge, and I want to find a silver lining in that, but I don't know where it is.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is certainly tough. I know that my GTAs have, we're just now getting to the point where we can actually talk about things, to be honest, because, for us, we did have to transition, at least 2/3 of the material online. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, just because of all the changes that were happening during the summer, we didn't really get to start on that until August. And so we were doing it week by week. It was just I had 2 other lecturers that were helping me out, and so we were building content week by week and just sort of uploading it. Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It does challenge things a bit, and the GTAs feel like we have a good relationship, and they said, there were some times where we felt like we didn't want to do what you said, but things were so crazy and there was so much going on that we didn't even feel like we could really talk about it. And I hear that, there was not a lot of room for collaboration. There was, we got to get something done. Here it is, make it happen.
Yeah.
So,
no, exactly. And I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges that's come out of all this, is mm-hmm. that it really has changed the nature of what it means to be supervising in this environment, right? And I feel like, we have so many more tools to go in and see how effective our graduate students are at mm-hmm. teaching in this environment. but I feel very creepy to use them,
Sure.
right? Whereas before I might have gone in, we use Blackboard as our LMS. I might have not really thought a lot about going in and just taking a look and seeing how things are doing with their course. Now I feel like, oh, that's kind of like overreach on my part. Whereas before, if I was worried that something wasn't going on, I'd check it out.
Right.
Now I feel like, you really have to have a good reason to go into this.
Yeah. And there's that whole idea of grace, right?
Yeah.
And,
And kindness and
even if I know I'm behind too, but even I know that a GTA is behind, how much do I want to push them?
right.
Because this, in all honesty, it's not really what we hired them for.
Nobody
hired them in
signed up for
February.
this.
This was,
Nobody signed up for this.
Right.
None of us did, And yes, on the other hand, I look at this and say, there are some huge advantages, right? Our graduate students would not really have gotten the chance to teach online prior to this, right? So now they're going out, and when they go for their next job,
Yep.
they have a greater toolkit than they would have had before.
Sure.
Right. And so and they're learning some really important things about online education that will be useful to them in the future. And I'm fairly certain that they would not have had this exposure before.
Yeah.
At least not in our institution. So maybe that's a silver lining.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Kelly. That's something we've talked about a lot. We're actually going to do next week, after grades are in, we're going to do some sort of wrap up training about online education. We're going to have somebody from our teaching and learning center just do an hour-long session on, because they have the learning system. I'm not worried about that, but just general engagement. How do you keep people moving? What's a good pace? How do you provide feedback on an ongoing basis? So that sort of thing, just to kind of wrap things up. What about other thoughts?
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that this did was reveal to us where the inequities and the inequalities are in the supervisor-supervised relationship, but then also for graduate students more generally. They are students and they are teachers, and those two roles don't always work well together.
Yeah.
So I think if there's a silver lining, it's really pushed us to think more consciously and maybe intentionally about how to deal with some of those inequities and inequalities that we don't notice when we see these graduate students every day and when they're in our classes or they're working with us in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I do. I think that's huge. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. That's a good point.
I agree with that too, Michelle. It's really brought to light some of the mental health struggles that our graduate teaching assistants, I wouldn't have known beforehand. But because everything is so on the surface now, it's so easy to bubble up. And just the lack of help, not the lack of help, but just because the support systems on campus are so overwhelmed, I think sometimes those graduate students and graduate teaching assistants especially just kind of get overlooked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's a really good point. I was in a session a couple days ago on graduate teaching assistants in the basic course, and someone compared them to kind of the sandwich generation, where they're kind of in that same position that people that are caring for kids and caring for their parents are in. Our graduate students are kind of the reverse of that, right? They're both a student and an instructor, and so they tend to have magnified the kind of the structural flaws of each of that, right? And it has revealed some of the cracks in our system that we need to fix, right? And particularly the mental health end of things. But I kind of feel that being in this environment myself and being subjected to some of the kinds of stresses that students, that we're all experiencing, understanding that this is taking a toll on all of us has been a really eye-opening, eye-opening thing for me. Sure. It's really made me more sensitive, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I know one thing just came to mind. Are there other thoughts? I know one thing that we have seen an increase in is, I don't think it's just our students, but is students going directly to the dean of students when they have problems. And so totally skipping the instructor or the GTA, totally skipping me, totally skipping the department head, just saying, dean of students, I have a problem with this particular GTA and what they are doing or not doing online. And so that's been eye-opening for me. And so that's brought on some other challenges. Kind of the flip side of that, if there is one, is that silver lining of, okay, I need to be a little more aware. And I don't want to be sort of, you know, over their shoulders the entire time. But there are some gaps in terms of what they just don't know how to do, and what they haven't had experience with, understandably. So that has helped me to kind of see that moving online is not a natural, it's not a natural process, right? So it's not, just because you're great in the classroom, we have some phenomenal in classroom TAs, that might not translate over to the online space without some extensive training. So.
Jessica, do you think that that's a trend that maybe mirrors what's happening societally with respect to dissent in general, is that we're bypassing what would be the traditional channels in favor of kind of the splashy things that are going to get more attention faster?
Absolutely. I do. You know, I've seen it. You know, we've definitely, I mean, my department head even said, you know, they're seeing it across the university that the students are just going straight to the dean of students and they're not having those discussions. And I'm finding myself, and y'all maybe too, but saying to the student, they'll write, you know, they'll send an email. And it's like, have you talked to the instructor about this? Oh no, they just they didn't answer my email. I sent it yesterday, so I contacted you. I'm like, well, you know, let's go back. Let's actually sit down. Did you ask the instructor when it was due? You know, but just so maybe you're right, Michelle. Just, I don't know, how am I heard, right? How am I heard in the biggest way, in the quickest way possible? Might be an interesting way to frame that. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's an opportunity also for us to reinforce, if we have fair and judicious processes, that it's important for us to have those in place. And students need to learn how to trust those mechanisms as well, right? I mean, we're in a situation now where things as basic as elections are being called into question. And I think it's important for students, we're going to have to teach them how to trust processes, but those processes then by definition will need to be transparent and equitable and fair. And that's, I think, the important part of all this, right? And I feel like we have some good processes in place, like exactly what you are mentioning. You know, if somebody goes to the DUS, Director of Undergraduate Studies, goes to the department head, goes to somebody in the dean's office, they are automatically put back down to at least my level. And then my first question to them is, tell me about your conversations with the instructor. What has happened there? And then we start from that process. But we always let them know, here's how, you know, I tell them, this is how I think it should work out. You always have the avenue of going to the next level, and here's what the next level is. So it's important for them to understand they have options and they have avenues, and there is a process to follow, and that process should be equitable in the long run.
I think the other thing that it gives us the opportunity to do is to help them understand how their lives are going to be once they leave the university or educational setting. And so if you're in an organization, you don't go to the CEO because you're mad at the supervisor, or you're mad at one of your coworkers or one of your team members. You figure out how to interact with people and try to come to a resolution. If there is no resolution, then there are certainly other processes like what you're talking about in terms of equitable processes. But I think we do them a huge disservice if we don't help them understand or learn that there are communication solutions to many of these situations they find themselves in.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, though, you know, it becomes an issue of power, right? They feel they're exerting their power by going to the dean. And that only indicates to me that they feel somewhat powerless any other way, right? So it does come down to that in the end. And I do think that that's where, things like transparency really come into play, right? How am I being graded? How am I being communicated with? Is everybody receiving the same level of communication? All of those really basic things come into play in these situations.
Mhm. Yeah.
We haven't seen the go straight to the dean yet, I have to say.
Well, on a positive note, I think it's helped a lot of the GTAs, though, to understand the bigger picture very quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
Power and importance of communication, as well as sort of perception and impression and all of that good stuff. I mean, all that is forefront for them, and I've tried very hard to let them know that I've got their back no matter what. I mean, we'll figure. I'm not going to completely side the student, and the TA and I might have to work something out where we together create a solution. But for them to see how their communication, or how communication in general can be perceived, and how it might make people act has been positive in some ways.
I would agree with that. And I think the importance of, so the big killer this semester for our instructors has been the flood of email communication from the students, right? I mean, we're all grappling with this.
Right.
And one of the things that, we continue to reinforce with our students, with our instructors, is you've got to communicate up front. If you're doing a good job up front, you are going to cut down on the email traffic.
Sure.
And that has been a very difficult thing to show them. But then once they begin to get that process going, they see the benefits. So, it has been, you're right. Communication is just key.
Yeah. It's
Kelly,
Michelle, go ahead.
Kelly, can you help me understand a little bit your front end piece there? Because, one of the things that we're finding is that our students are shutting down. So even as good as the communication is on the front end, they're not getting through those, whether they're written or oral or video or even in the synchronous sessions, they're not getting through that interaction or that communication because they're shutting down, they're overwhelmed, there are 8 million other things, they're distracted, all of those types of things. So the email traffic is actually increasing.
Oh, it's
simply
huge.
because it says, I'm lost. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, so that is exactly what I'm referring to, right? That so the way our course is structured, we have largely asynchronous content. They meet once a week for a discussion session that's optional. The TAs are recording it via Zoom, but it's really optional, but they miss a lot if they don't attend those sessions. So we do lose a few students because they're not able, or they're not attending those sessions. The only mandatory sessions are the speech delivery sessions. So, we do 4 speeches in our basic course, and those are non-negotiable, right? You have to show up, you have to be on camera, you have to have your microphone working, all of it. And those weekly discussion sessions are things like to practice using Zoom, to practice sharing your screen, to do all of these things. And then we break the speech delivery groups down into 5 or 6 students. So the same 5 or 6 students deliver speeches in the same group all semester long. But the kinds of communication that we are encouraging our instructors to do is a weekly communication on early in the week, saying, here we go, these are the things you are responsible for this week, whether it's homework assignments or watching videos, whatever it is, it's laid out in a weekly email to their student. And then the other communication that we tend to encourage, in addition to the discussion sessions, which is largely a Q&A session, right? The instructor might be covering a point or elaborating on a point in that session, a concept or whatever it is, but it's largely a Q&A for the students. In the process of grading, there's only so much feedback that you can write out every week, right? So we encourage our instructors to just give some general feedback to the class on things that they are seeing in the weekly assignments or the weekly homework, so that it becomes a feedback mechanism later in the week, but one that's generalized so that the whole class can benefit by it. So, and then, going back to those emails that come in saying, I don't know where things are. If that Monday morning email goes out on Monday morning, then the students in the class become accustomed to knowing, I got that email on Monday. Maybe I better check that for information before I go anywhere else. It becomes the roadmap for the students in the class. We're really, really structured in our approach. So, in terms of the activities, homework assignments, we went to a digital platform this year. All of those things actually, I think, contribute to students being able to navigate a little bit more readily. They kind of by default have to figure things out, but they all figure out the same things. So
I'm going to go ahead and pull us back together, right, so we can share some of
Yeah.
these ideas. Thank you. This has been a really good, fruitful discussion. So I think you should see 60 seconds in just a second. They must have had a lot to say in the other group.
I'm not sure we filled out our Google Doc.
Oh, I got some of the things. I was typing. Excellent. Okay.
That's good. I forgot all about the Google Doc.
That's okay. No worries. It's the end of the semester. Anything goes at this point, whatever we're feeling. So thank you for that discussion. I would love to, we've got about 25 or so minutes left. I'd love to just kind of pull some of this together and talk a little bit about some of the things that we talked about in our smaller groups, but then as a larger group, really kind of explore some possibilities and some opportunities for where this can take us. So I'll go ahead and the group that I was not in. So Jess and Erin, do y'all want to talk a little bit about some of the things that maybe you wrote down in the doc or some of the things that you shared in your group?
Absolutely. So as a group, some of the things we talked about was it's really hard to balance between being in class versus like at home stop working time for everybody. It's hard to create that distinction when you are entirely online and doing everything on your computer. So it's really easy just to keep on working because you don't have a different space to go to interact. Despite that, some of the cool things that we talked about was the interactions that we were able to have this semester with things like online office hours, how convenient that was, that if you had a question or anything for your basic course director, you could really quickly hop on Zoom with them. You didn't have to set up and go to their office and all of that stuff. So it was a lot easier to have those forms of communications, as well as with students. It seemed like they were more likely to hop on to our office hours and talk to us for longer periods of time because they were craving communication, but also they felt more comfortable with it than they would have coming to our office otherwise. And one of the really awesome things that one of my group members talked about was the use of GroupMe this semester. So I mentioned how our cohort has a GroupMe and how that has helped us. If we have questions or whatever, we're able to send you one email as opposed to sending you 6 different emails. If we all have the same question, we're able to do that, but also using it in the classroom as a resource to communicate with your students. They found that was a really, really great way to be able to communicate with them and get them to communicate back as opposed to email all the time, because it was more of an informal environment and students were more comfortable. And then just overall, the personal aspect was the big thing. Figuring everything out was hard, but at the end of the day, it helped relationships in a lot of ways. Although at first it was harder to develop those relationships because you weren't able to do training in person, but we were able to do videos online. So that helped us in terms of our training as TAs, as opposed to having to go and sit in an 8-hour session where we wouldn't retain as much information.
Great point. Does anybody from my group want to talk through some of our challenges and maybe just things that you saw as opportunities?
I volunteer Kelly.
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Michelle. So challenges, I got to go back, rewind the conversation that we had. One of the biggest challenges, I think, has been just this lack of autonomy for our instructors, and how it just becomes difficult for them to do things. They end up just being graders in many ways because we're teaching online. And I think this is presented a lot of challenges for them. Email is overwhelming, and so we've tried to emphasize the importance of communication, structured communication, by our instructors. Sending out that email early in the week to their students, and listing the various things that are coming due that week, and then at the end of the week, giving some generalized feedback on the learning activities that took place, instead of having to deliver individual feedback to each student. It just seems to me that some of the issues surrounding communication have become forefront issues, and it really has exposed, ironically, for a communication discipline, how important communication is in this environment, right? And establishing mechanisms that can be relied on, and can be, that the students know where to go to get information, it can actually shortcut the communication processes that need to take place. The other thing we talked about was having transparency in the ways that we can adjudicate issues that students encounter. Jessica mentioned that there seems to be a predominance of students going directly to the dean and bypassing not only the instructor, but the basic course director, maybe the director of undergraduate studies, maybe the department chair, before, just taking their grievance to the top. And Michelle had suggested that maybe this is a way that students are learning how to, kind of, I don't know, exert their power in a way that, gets results, but at the expense of burning the relationships in between. And so this has become an opportunity, I think, for us to make sure that we have processes that are in place that are transparent and equitable, and teaching our students to use these processes and use them effectively, because they need to know how to do this after they graduate, right? That first job where they go to the CEO and they have a problem with a colleague, they're going to get themselves fired. So that doesn't help anybody, right? So I think that's the other thing that we probably touched on in our group.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. So anything else we want to hit there before we kind of start to move forward? And you all will have access to this. So if you have new ideas, please feel free to add them. I figured we could just share this with whomever might like it. Okay, so let's move on. I'm just sort of pulling us down to our large group discussion points. And there's definitely some things I want to pull from up here that we can take down to the bottom, right? But thinking specifically about, what are some solutions and opportunities that you can share with some other people. And so we mentioned, just the idea that we can see communication, right, and all of its processes and all of its challenges. It's certainly there and present. What are some other opportunities maybe that, Jess, maybe that y'all kind of talked about in your group?
Well, one of them was the group me. I think that's,
Yeah.
that was a big thing.
Okay.
As far as kind of having a little bit more of a personal tone with the students. And then what else is there? Definitely continuing the online office hours throughout, even after the pandemic. So not just like leaving that and letting that go. Other solutions.
Don't worry, we were struggling with these too.
I know we're
let me jump in, because I think one of the advantages that we are seeing is by taking some of the content out of the classroom and having the students do more on their own, that actually works to our advantage in many respects. It's kind of the old idea of the flipped classroom that we all were really challenged to getting implemented. we thought it was a great idea, but we couldn't get it implemented. So one of the things that I hope that comes out of this is different models in the classroom that are workable for us, and putting a little bit more responsibility on the students to do some of that learning activity outside of the classroom before they come to the classroom, so that we can engage at a higher level once we see them face to face.
Kelly, I actually wanted to jump in here. I shared this in another meeting earlier this week, but one thing that we did that I think we're probably going to keep to some extent was because we had to move our lectures online, we created little, it's like sort of mini lectures, right? So there would be a little mini lecture, and then we would pull something funny from online, and we would put all this into a little quiz every week. And so it was not high stakes at all, but we would ask students to look over the material, use the book while they take the quiz. And so they're gaining, just sort of daily points, but they're also sort of reviewing the material. And so what I noticed as soon as I started stepping into the classrooms to supervise or to observe was that students were more prepared. The ones that were there were more prepared this semester than they had been before. So they were like flipping through notes, and I was like, what is this? Well, they had to take the quiz, so they had to write it down. So that's certainly something that we might want to continue to do as we move forward. But they, for the most part, the ones I think, and maybe Jess and Aaron can speak to this, but the ones that took the quizzes seemed to get a lot out of it, right? We definitely still had a good number of students who just decided they weren't doing it. And that's a little bit of a different issue, right? But those that took advantage of that seem to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I personally would say that I enjoyed kind of I know there's like the flipped classroom, but I kind of like the blended classroom that we've been doing, where it is outside, but also we're still doing some lecturing inside, because there are some students who really enjoy the lecturing. That's just who they are. They've been used to that. And especially if they're freshmen, it's hard for them to kind of go directly to a flipped classroom without them having that experience of it beforehand. So because they're like, I don't know, they're kind of like shocked. I'm like, I have to do this all on my own, because some people aren't very they don't have that motivation to do it all on their own. So I think that can be an issue when it comes to a completely flipped classroom with freshmen, at least how I've noticed. So I think the blended classroom works nicely.
Great. Yeah, I just want to call attention. Cindy put some good stuff in about, let's see, good stuff in about the tutorials, the 15 minutes each. So that seems like it might be working for different people. Nearpod, I don't know anything about that, Arian.
So one of the classes that I TA for, I'm her assistant. She teaches small group communication, and she's tried that. And basically what it is she records an entire lecture like over a video. You can use PowerPoints and whatever you want to personalize it. And then she creates questions. So like she'll talk about a concept and say, this is what avoidance uncertainty is. And then as soon as she's done explaining it and giving examples, a question will pop up and it will say, what is avoidance uncertainty? And then the students fill that out, or they can say, what are some examples, and she can do either like an application-based question, or she can do a knowledge-based question. So that participation is embedded in the lesson for the course. I think Illinois State just got like access to use it fully as a university, and I haven't used it for my students personally, just because our class isn't lecture based, but I didn't know if anyone else had used it or found success using it.
Great. Thank you, Arian. And then Cindy was also mentioning this fully online synchronous has enabled you to track what students are doing. That's a great point. What they're not doing.
Exactly, what they're not doing.
What they're not doing. Yeah, so also the ebook has highly interactive. Great. Very nice. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and keep moving. Are there other things, other opportunities that we want to think about, or are we ready to move on to sort of the big takeaways for us as leaders and supervisors, and then also as those who are following?
I just wanted to add real quick.
Yeah.
Something really interesting. One of my students already turned in their final learning reflection that they said they learned in the course was how to take notes out of a textbook because of the way we were doing it.
Mhm.
And again, it's a freshman. She's like, I've never done this before, but it was one of the most helpful things I learned how to do
Mhm.
for college through doing this course. She's like, none of my other classes helped me learn how to take the notes, because by doing the videos and the quizzes, she learned how to take notes out of her textbook.
Mhm.
So I think that is something really important, because it's not only teaching a skill that they generally wouldn't necessarily learn how to do
Mhm.
moving forward. That's something to consider when we're teaching.
Awesome. I know one more thing I wanted to share, and I think that the TAs can probably see this as well, although we haven't talked about it directly. I think for me, just an opportunity that I have seen for myself is going back to that transparency piece and being okay with the GTAs seeing that I'm struggling. And so just being very open and honest. There were many times where there were questions and situations that came up where I did not have an answer. And it was one of those things where I had to go back and I had to talk to people. And even when we talked to the entire faculty, they still didn't have an answer. But just being able to say, look, this is one of those situations where we're going to have to make a call. We're just going to have to go. There isn't a right answer, but we're going to have to make a call and move forward. So I think for me, just that opportunity to say that we can learn from one another, right, in this moment, and be okay with my modeling not being perfect.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback on that, reminding ourselves that our students are learning to learn in this fashion, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to be as proficient as we want them to be. We're not going to be as proficient at teaching them as we would like to be, but we will all get better at this as we go forward. I know for myself, my own students in the classes that I am teaching have progressively gotten better at doing things through the semester as I've kind of figured out what I wanted them to do, and they figured out how to do that. So just being gentle on ourselves, right? A little bit, but knowing that being the leader in this means that we have to recognize that they're learning as well.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, but actually we're doing well on time. So I'd love to move to sort of our final idea of what we might take into the future, right? So just thinking about how this experience might shape your teaching, might shape your learning. I'd actually have a quick screen here. I'm going to switch over and show you what's going on. Okay. So I would love for you all in the chat to just come up with one idea or concept and just kind of like as a text, just send it in the chat, something that you know you want to take away from the semester, something that you either want to keep thinking about or you know that has really impacted you as a supervisor or as someone who has been supervised. And then I'd love to kind of talk through some of those before we leave. All right, so go ahead and open that up. So what are some of your ideas? Nice, Michelle. So just minimizing inequalities, right, and inequities that exist. And that's something we talked about in our group. And I really appreciated that point that we need to be aware that there are always going to be inequalities and inequities in the relationships. And this, like we said, really brings it to light. Empathy, I love that, Arian. Yeah, I do too. I love that the responses I'm getting from people that say, let's give them grace and let's give them empathy, that I never thought I would hear that person say. That has been pretty cool. So I appreciate that too, just keeping that in mind. Continuing to refine, good. The pre-GTA training materials, awesome. Even when we're back to training in person, totally agree, Cindy. Yeah, I'm with that too. I'm like, oh wow, there are so many different things we could have done. Even it was as simple for me as I have literally given them a notebook, right, with dividers and papers, and we had things online too. But like when they walked in for training, I was like, here's your notebook, here's your manual. And then we had to look at that and say, we can't do that anymore. That's not really allowed right now. So I've got to create something online that's accessible. So just sort of figuring out how we can do this differently. And it's probably not necessary for me to hand students a 3-ring binder in 2020. If they, it probably would be fine for them to just do it online. Okay, so advocating for flexibility. Love that, Nicole. Excellent. So we started monthly check-in meetings this semester and hope to keep them. Oh, I love that. So anybody else doing like monthly, weekly check-ins? Yeah, I know that we do with the TAs, we've been doing weekly. We always do that the first semester, but I'm thinking about certainly keeping it, maybe even opening up to all instructors. That's a very good idea. So what a takeaway, not ever being afraid to ask a question to others, no matter how simple. That's powerful, Erin, thank you. And that's definitely something I think we've all learned this semester for sure, is that there's not a strange question at all. So even if it's, can that student, are the students allowed to walk up to me at the end of the class? Is that allowed, or do we have to tell them to sit back down in their chair? Even little things like that we had to take up top and say, is this okay? What do you want us to do with this situation? Yeah, awesome. And then continuing to make the decision, a fun learning break in their hard lives, even though, even when this is over. Great, thank you, Jess, that's perfect. And then Megan says advocating for self-care for GTAs. I think that's really important, the instructors and the students. Very nice. Anything else? Final words of wisdom? No. Well, so I think when we first got in here, somebody said, you know, there are just more challenges. That maybe that was you, Kelly. There are more challenges than there are opportunities, and I still think there are many more challenges. But I'm hoping that we at least kind of wrestled with some of the opportunities and really thought about how we can move forward. Mrs. Cindy, what you said about leaving, yep, things out that don't work. Yep, I appreciate that. Yep, if it's not working, we can get rid of it. And I know for me, you know, there are things that we've been doing for decades now that didn't work online. Maybe we just need to stop and rethink and think about them in a different way. Sense of humor, I think, is awesome, fabulous. Yeah, it'll be a different switch. I appreciate that. Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time. Awesome work. You've got the Google Sheet, right, with some ideas and responses. And I'll copy this chat just in case we need it, and I'll get that sent out. So thank you for all of your great ideas, and I wish everybody a fabulous remainder of your semester. Thank you.